You're scrolling through vacation photos right now, or at least thinking about the next trip you want to take. Maybe you've got a destination saved somewhere, a place you keep coming back to in your head. You don't need a reason. You just want to go. That pull you feel isn't really about vacation days or Instagram. It's one of the oldest drives we have. Older than writing. Older than farming. Older, honestly, than the concept of home as we understand it. So the real question is, why does something in you want to move, explore, and see what's over the next hill, when staying put would honestly be a lot safer? To answer that, we have to go back further than you'd expect. Before cities, before villages, before humans had settled anywhere at all. For most of our species' history, humans weren't staying in one place. They were walking, constantly. Early Homo sapiens groups were highly mobile, following seasonal resources, tracking herds, moving with the availability of food and water. Staying still wasn't really an option. If the environment around you dried up or the animals moved on, you moved too, or you didn't survive. Here's the strange part, though. Movement wasn't just a burden humans tolerated. There's a growing body of research suggesting it became something humans were actually built to seek out. Genetic studies have identified a variant of a gene called DRD4, specifically a version often nicknamed the wanderlust gene in popular science writing, that's linked to novelty-seeking behavior and has been found at higher frequencies in populations with a history of long-distance migration. Now, one gene doesn't explain something this big on its own. Human behavior is never that simple. But it's a real signal. Some of us may be biologically primed to crave new environments more than others. Think about that. Wanting to travel might not just be cultural. It might be partly written into your DNA. Around 70,000 years ago, something remarkable happened. Homo sapiens began expanding out of Africa in waves, eventually spreading into Europe, Asia, and beyond. Genetic and archaeological evidence traces this dispersal across tens of thousands of years, with humans crossing deserts, coastlines, and eventually open water to reach places like Australia, a journey that required deliberate seafaring roughly 50,000 years ago, based on the timeline reconstructed from sites on the Australian continent. Let that sink in for a second. Humans built boats, or at least seaworthy rafts, and paddled into open ocean toward land they couldn't see, based purely on the idea that something might be out there. That's not a survival necessity. That's curiosity with a paddle. But here's the thing. Moving wasn't free. Every migration came with enormous risk. New predators, unknown diseases, unfamiliar plants that might be food or might be poison. Leaving a known environment for an unknown one is, from a pure survival standpoint, a terrible bet. So why did we keep doing it? This is where the idea gets interesting. Some researchers propose that the drive to explore wasn't a bug in early human psychology. It was a feature that paid off often enough over long enough timescales to be worth the risk. Groups that stayed completely put when their environment declined sometimes died out entirely. Groups with at least some members willing to scout new territory sometimes found better resources, safer land, or entirely new opportunities. Evolution doesn't need every risky bet to pay off. It just needs enough of them to. Here's what makes this so important. That tension, the pull toward new places, fighting against the pull toward safety and familiarity, isn't a flaw in how humans think. It's the core operating system. We are, more than almost any other mammal on the planet, a species defined by our willingness to leave. Compare that to most other animals who are territorial by default, sticking to a fixed range they know intimately. Humans did the opposite. We spread to nearly every landmass on Earth, adapting to deserts, Arctic tundra, rainforests, and mountain ranges, often within a few thousand years of arriving somewhere new. No other large mammal has anywhere close to that range of habitats. Think about that. You are descended, without exception, from people who left somewhere. Every single person alive today has an unbroken line of ancestors who, at some point, chose to move rather than stay. Not once, repeatedly, across tens of thousands of years, in nearly every branch of the family tree. Now, here's the pivot that reframes the whole thing. As humans started settling down, first with early semi-permanent camps, and eventually with full agricultural societies around 10 to 12,000 years ago, you'd expect the urge to wander to fade out. Farming, after all, is the opposite of nomadic life. You plant something, you wait, you stay near it. Except that's not what happened. Instead, the drive to explore didn't disappear. It just got rerouted into new forms. Trade routes expanded dramatically once settlements existed with surplus goods to exchange. The Silk Road, connecting East Asia to the Mediterranean, eventually stretched across thousands of miles, moving not just goods, but ideas, language, and stories between civilizations that had never had direct contact before. People who didn't need to travel for survival anymore kept traveling anyway. For trade, for curiosity, for status, for reasons that had nothing to do with hunger and everything to do with something less tangible. Here's a specific example that captures this shift well. Ancient Polynesian navigators, without instruments, without written maps, used stars, wave patterns, and the behavior of birds to navigate across thousands of miles of open Pacific Ocean, settling islands as remote as Hawaii and Easter Island over the course of roughly 2,000 years. This wasn't accidental drifting. Researchers studying traditional wayfinding techniques have shown these were deliberate, skilled, repeatable voyages passed down through highly trained navigators. That's not migration out of desperation. That's exploration as mastery, as identity, as something worth dedicating a life to. Fast forward again, and you start to see travel become something else entirely, a marker of status and personal transformation. In ancient Rome, wealthy citizens undertook long journeys to Greece and Egypt, partly for education, and partly, historians argue, for the simple prestige of having seen famous, distant places. The idea that travel changes you, that it makes you more cultured or more complete as a person, isn't a modern invention. It shows up remarkably early. Think about that. The humble brag vacation photo has ancient roots. But here's the problem with treating this purely as vanity. Something deeper seems to be going on biologically, and this is where modern neuroscience picks up the thread. Studies on novelty and the brain have consistently shown that new environments and new experiences trigger dopamine release in the brain's reward pathways, the same neurochemical system involved in motivation and pleasure. Predictable, familiar environments don't generate nearly the same neural response. Your brain, quite literally, seems to reward you for encountering something it hasn't seen before. This lines up with a well-documented psychological effect called the novelty-seeking trait, studied extensively in personality psychology, where individuals vary in how strongly they're drawn to new stimuli, new places, and unfamiliar situations. Some people score high on this trait, some score low, but the mechanism itself, the brain treating novelty as inherently rewarding, appears to be close to universal across humans, just tuned to different intensities. So when you feel that itch to book a flight somewhere you've never been, that's not randomly generated boredom. That's an ancient reward system doing exactly the job it evolved to do. Here's where the stakes get even bigger. Some researchers argue that this drive toward exploration isn't just a leftover survival trait. It may have actively shaped human cognitive development. Navigating unfamiliar terrain requires spatial memory, risk assessment, problem solving under uncertainty, and social coordination with travel companions. Repeatedly doing this, generation after generation, may have placed real evolutionary pressure on exactly the cognitive skills that make humans distinct from other primates. In other words, we might not just be smart enough to explore. Exploring might be part of what made us this smart in the first place. Think about that for a second. Every trip you've ever taken, even a weekend one, is quietly exercising a set of mental muscles that our species built by literally walking across the planet. Here's a modern angle here too, and it's a strange one. Numerous surveys and psychological studies on well-being consistently find that people report higher life satisfaction from experiences, trips, adventures, shared memories in new places, than from equivalent spending on material possessions. Researchers studying this experiential purchases effect suggest that new experiences resist the adaptation effect that dulls the excitement of buying objects. A new gadget feels exciting for a few weeks and then fades into the background of your life. A trip becomes a story, a memory, part of your personal narrative. For decades. That's not coincidence. That's an ancient brain, still rating novelty and experience above possessions, exactly the way it always has. And here's an angle you might not expect. This same drive appears to explain part of why isolation, whether through prolonged lockdowns, illness, or simply repetitive daily routines, tends to correlate with lower reported mood and motivation in psychological research. Humans, placed in unchanging, unfamiliar-free environments for extended periods, often report symptoms resembling restlessness, low energy, and a kind of mental fog. Some researchers frame this as evidence that novelty isn't a luxury for humans. It's closer to a nutrient, something we're built to need in at least small, regular doses. Think about that. Your desire to see new places might not be indulgent. It might be closer to a basic psychological requirement, quietly wired in from 100,000 years of ancestors who had to keep moving to survive. So here's the full picture. It starts with early humans who had no choice but to move constantly, following food and water across shifting landscapes. Then, a genetic predisposition toward novelty seeking, showing up more strongly in populations with deep migratory histories. Then, deliberate, skilled ocean voyages, settling remote islands, using nothing but stars and instinct. Then, trade routes and empires, turning exploration into commerce and status, once survival travel was no longer strictly necessary. Then, Roman elites, treating distant travel as a mark of a well-lived life. Then, modern neuroscience, showing dopamine rewarding your brain every time it encounters something new.
Then psychological research showing experiences beat possessions almost every single time we measure human happiness.
Which brings us back to you, scrolling through vacation photos or daydreaming about a place you've never been. That's not randomness. That's not simply wanting an escape from routine. That's hundreds of thousands of years of ancestors who walked, sailed, and migrated across an entire planet, leaving behind a brain that still lights up at the thought of somewhere new. Being human might mean being permanently, quietly, unfinished with any one place. Not because home doesn't matter, but because somewhere in your biology, there's still a version of you standing at the edge of a coastline, looking at the horizon, wondering what's out there. If you're into more of these why humans are like this deep dives, there's a whole channel built around exactly this kind of question.
Thanks for watching and subscribe to the channel.